Okay, so we are at the final video. I'm not actually gonna lie. I am so happy right now because I don't have to do more commentary. Especially at the end, you can actually notice that I was getting exhausted. We are at the final video and we are gonna be making the tilak. Now, before we start doing that, you can see the process. By the way, I have just copied the mesh and I am deleting everything else that is not gonna be where the tilak is not gonna be so that we can actually subdivide it and start painting on it. Before we do that, let's actually talk about the tilak. Actually, while we do that, you can see that I'm subdividing it. I really wanted to tell you what the tilak is, but let's actually talk about that later. You can see that I have separated this particular part and I have subdivided it. The reason of the subdivision is to give it more polygons to work with, which means that we'll be able to create a much more high quality texture. Right now, you can see that we have 143,000 faces, and we are going to subdivide it until, I don't know, I think 2.2 million subdivision or 2.2 million polygons. The idea is again pretty simple. The idea is to paint the map in this particular area and then we'll be able to just bake it because we already have the UVs, so it's gonna be pretty simple to bake it as well. As you can see that I have this image that I have prepared and you can see that I have downloaded it from the textures.com. And now what I am gonna do, I am just going to select a part of it, or maybe not a part of it actually. I think I have just cropped it on a 1:1 ratio and now I'm gonna be using it as a stencil. You can see right now, I'm not using it as a stencil right now, but you can see how the texture is looking with these settings. Yeah, this is what we have right now with the airbrush. No, oh wait, we have anchored right now. So with the anchored, that's how the texture is gonna look. And you're gonna see the painting process basically. So we are gonna be painting a mask, and that mask is gonna be converted into a material. So right now you can see how the brush is behaving, and this is actually kind of important because we are going to be using this texture to basically create the whole tilak mask. And right now you can see the settings that I'm using. So for example, in airbrush, this is how it is behaving. And eventually we are going to be able to create a really nice looking mask which we are going to be able to use to create a material. But right now you can see how the brush is behaving. So at this particular point, I am just trying to figure out the settings that's gonna work for the brush. So this is how the brush actually looks like right now. As you can see, we need to remove some of it from the bottom. Otherwise, there is gonna be a sharp line in the texture and we don't need that. You can see that we have basically removed that. I have a reference for it, by the way, just in case if you are wondering. So I am just looking at a reference on my second screen and trying to create something similar. But yeah, you can see that I have blocked out the bigger shapes first. So this is the bigger shape of the tilak. And after that, I am actually just going to start removing some of the colors. But before that, I am just adding the tilak here, like the bigger colors here, not the tilak. Remember when we were painting the skin, we are actually gonna do something similar with this. So we are gonna be blocking out the bigger shapes and then we'll start adding and removing some of the colors to, create more randomness. But yeah, right now, as you can see that I am just adding the bigger forms, like the bigger shapes, and there is not even that much randomness that is happening. So we are gonna be creating that randomness later. The first step is to create the bigger shapes, and that is what I'm doing right now. Okay, so now as you can see that I have started to change the texture, and the reason is I basically wanna change some of the settings to give more randomness. As you can see that I'm increasing the brightness and I'm also increasing the contrast so that there will be more changes in the texture. Right now, there are more gray areas, and I don't really like that. So, in order to eliminate the gray areas, I have to increase the contrast. The texture have already begun a little bit too like sharp, so that is something that I was actually going for. Now we need to change a little bit of settings, I guess, or maybe just start adding the whites and the blacks to create the randomness. Okay, so I guess now it is time to change the settings. As you can see that I've switched to the airbrush mode, and again the idea is to just add as much randomness as I possibly can. Now you can see that I've started to remove some of the colors from the edges. The idea is again to remove and to add it so that we'll be able to get more randomness. This is pretty much going to be the process again. We've already, used this process of adding and removing. So I am just doing the similar thing here. Also, I am gonna be removing some of the colors from the middle to give more randomness. But these are like some of the bigger shapes that I'm trying to achieve. And yeah, you can see that I am again changing the brush type to anchored. This is something that I'm just gonna keep on doing. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna do a whole lot of repetitive work, which means that this is like the right time to talk about the tilak. Yeah, the tilak is basically a mark. In Sanskrit, the exact meaning of the word is called mark, which a human or not a human, but which a Hindu or a Sanatani wears. The more scientific reason for it is to basically keep the mind cool. I mean, at least that's what I've heard. If you were to, go towards the spirituality, like the reason to wear the tilak in terms of spirituality, a person basically wears a tilak at the third eye. It is to invoke divine energy in terms of chakra. In Hindu, there is a concept of chakra, and in order to invoke that chakra, like Hindus wear the tilak on the third eye because on the third eye there is this called Ajna chakra, which is presented on the forehead. So, in order to calm that down or in order to invoke it, Hindus wear this tilak, and this is like the more spiritual reason to do it. I already told you the more scientific reason. At least I could actually be wrong, by the way. I don't know, but yeah, this is basically why Hindus wear the tilak. But you can also say this is more of a like a sign, just like a Muslim basically wears a hat, like the hat a Muslim wears. A Christian usually wears a cross. Hindus usually, wear this tilak so that you can actually just identify them. Just like Sikhs actually wear a turban. So yeah, this is something similar, I think, to basically have a identification. But yeah, I think it's not about an identification. I've never really heard like a priest of Hindu say that tilak is being, worn because this is a part of identification. But I've told you that this is actually to invoke the chakra that Hindus have on the forehead. This is to keep the calms. In order to, control the anger, you basically wear the tilak. Now that I've actually talked about the tilak, let's see what I am doing right now. You can see that with the brush, I have started to remove some of the colors from these wrinkles, and the idea is again pretty simple. If you were to paint a human with something like with the paint, you're gonna see that wherever there are crevices, the paint tend to just remove itself from there, and this is something similar that I'm actually trying to achieve here. Right now, you can see that I'm using the image as an stencil. Using this as a stencil, I am basically just going to be removing some of the colors and adding some of the colors. That removing and adding is going to give me more randomness, and that randomness is basically gonna make the Tilak look cool. After adding and removing, we are actually gonna be using this mask as a material, and there is one thing that I have forgotten to record. In this particular case, that I basically create a different mask for different colors as well. So that is also one of the things that I have forgotten to record, but it's not really that hard to do. I'll actually show you how the mask looks. Right now you can see that I am just removing and adding. Actually, I'm figuring out best kind of brush that's gonna work. This is actually just me figuring out the right way of approaching this particular stuff. And just like you, I am also someone who have not already rehearsed this thing, so it's just me figuring it out. And you can see what I'm actually trying to do. Right now you can see that I am like again just trying to use the stencil, but in the future I definitely remember that I have created an alpha, and I am gonna be using that alpha to paint it a bit better. But right now, as you can see, that I'm actually using just the stencil. You're gonna see that I am just changing it from stencil to viewport. Like, I am just trying to figure out everything that I can to get the randomness out of it. I am right now not getting the result that I really wanted to. So yeah, you can see that I am just like painting, like filling all this stuff manually. But yes, don't you worry, we are actually gonna be using that alpha, that I'll obviously give it to you. Don't you worry about it. Because everything that I use is I am actually gonna provide in the like source file. I have started to create some randomness in terms of the translucency, like the transparency of the mask. So I have started using this alpha that I was talking about, and don't you worry, you are gonna get this alpha. Actually, this is an alpha that I have created in the GIMP, and this alpha is just a stamp of an already existed brush in the GIMP. So we are technically just using a GIMP brush. This is like all the thing that I can say about it. So I am gonna provide you with this image, this alpha. So don't you worry. And as you can see, with the anchored like way of painting stuff, you can actually get really nice looking randomness, and we are gonna be creating and using this way. So as you can clearly see how nice it actually is looking, the amount of randomness, the variation you are getting out of the brush is pretty nice. So that is something we are gonna be using in the Tilak. And yeah, you can see the amount of sharpness you are getting with this alpha and the amount of variation obviously. So this is the alpha that we are probably going to be using for the rest of this video. I'll also show you how I have actually set up the final material, so it's not like the final material is not really that big of a deal. I just use this mask to differentiate between the skin shader and the Tilak shader. So that's basically what we are going to be doing with this particular mask. Now you can see that we are almost done with the edges of the Tilak. So now we can just go in the middle and start adding the variation of like the whole Tilak is not a solid object. You do have some sort of variation in terms of the opacity of the tilak, if you can say it like it. So we are going to be introducing that. But right now we are actually just working on the edges. So let's just, complete that particular part, and then we can go in the middle. Right now you can see the amount of variation we have on the edges. I mean, we only have that variation on the edges actually, not in the middle. So We are eventually gonna go into the middle. Okay, so now we are done with the edges. As you can see that I have started adding a little bit of opacity mask. Like I have started to remove the blacks. And what this is going to do, it is going to create a different kind of opacity throughout the whole tilak area. You can see that I am basically just using the white color with the lower strength to create it. This is actually again just going to create some randomness in terms of opacity. So when we'll start using this mask, the whole tilak won't have the same opacity, and there are going to be some variation, and these are the variation that we are actually looking for. This is something that is like super important to do. After that variation that we have added, I have re-added the blacks. This is to just give more variation. Okay, so we have finally created the mask, and you must have seen the process because I was kind of repeating it again and again. But now, what we are gonna do, we are basically just going to bake it onto an image texture, and then we are going to be using that image texture to create a material. But before that, I am again just changing the mask. Okay, now I am baking. So I am creating this image texture called Parshuram Tilak mask. I think, yep, Tilak mask. And this is going to be a 4K map, as you can see. And this is also going to be the UDIMs because we have UDIMs in this particular case. But I think, wait, because this is just a Tilak area, I don't think we actually need a UDIM. So we can ignore the UDIM in this particular case. I think we can actually just start creating, like baking, sorry, not creating, but we can start baking it on this particular image texture. You can see again we are going to be using the emission. We have already talked about the baking. We are going to be using the emission way of baking stuff. So the bake type is going to be emit from the surface. The target is going to be the image texture, and yeah, you can see that we have baked the texture, and now we can just start using it. So in this particular image, actually we I think we need to save it, or maybe not. It is working. So you can see this is the texture, and now we just need to create a material for it. First thing first, we need to create a mask between the colors. In order to do that, as you can see that I am actually just going to put the mask into the factor, and you're gonna see this is how it is looking. The white is going to be the tilak, which means the white is gonna be the part where we can actually add the colors. Now we are gonna do the same thing for the specular, for the normal, for the displacement, basically for everything, so that we can actually create a different input for a different settings. And yeah, you can see I really hope that this does not actually get confusing, by the way. I am just using it as a factor, and I am just gonna be putting it into the subsurface, and the value of the subsurface is actually gonna go into the B part, because this is the value that we are gonna be using, and the A is gonna be full on black because we don't want any subsurface on the tilak area, so we are actually just going to create it fully black. You can see that we have kind of removed the subsurface in order to give the color I am which I am doing right now. You can just give the colors like this. This is basically going to be the first step of creating the material, and now you can just increase the contrast so that you can eliminate the little bit of subsurface from it. So I am just going to increase the contrast, and the black is going to increase obviously, and the idea is to eliminate the subsurface from this particular area. Now you can see that we are not really getting any sort of subsurface on the tilak part. Now the specular, we can remove the specular by just changing the color to black, and the tilak is actually supposed to not have any sort of specular reflection, so I have basically just removed it from now. I might able to, I think I actually add it later, but for this particular time period I have just removed it. There is one thing that you can do. You can actually create a color like image texture for color. So you can actually just go into this particular mesh and go into the sculpt mode and start creating the color as well. I think that I'm not really going to do that. I think I'm actually going to try and do that procedurally in this case, but in the end I did actually I painted the color as well. So I am not really going to be showing you the process of painting the colors. Just remember that I did have painted the color. I think, wait, I can remember it. I can remember it. So this is actually a different mask for different color. And you can see that this mask is basically for the yellow color, and everything else is for the reds. And I am using a texture for this darker value that you can see in the color. That's basically how I have created this material. I thought that I have painted the color, but instead of the color, I basically have just painted a mask for different colors, and I'm using that mask to tell Blender that I want yellow in this particular area and red in that particular area. And on top of that, I am using a bump, just a little bit of bump on the tilak to create that. And some of the parts that you can see is coming out of tilak is some just a sculpt that I've did. As you can see that there is this sculpted area that is coming out of the forehead. This sculpt is pretty simple actually. I've just used the alpha with the anchored settings to push this particular part out of the skin. This is actually giving me that bumpy look. And yeah, that's basically it for this video and for this course. This is where we are actually going to be ending it, and I really hope that you have actually learned a little bit out of this course. And I again, this is my first time, so I have no idea how to do an outro, and because I have no idea, I'm just gonna say bye.